Go for it, Nora.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nora. Thanks. I am planning officer at Camden Council. Welcome to our show and tell. Some of you might have received an email from me with a survey. Thank you so much for completing it and sharing it further. I think most of you would not know why we're here, but just to make a short summary, we are looking to improve digital engagement in planning and placemaking, and to achieve this, we are looking at two main areas of work. One is digital sign notices to improve the way residents are notified about development and they interact with development first thing, and then looking at a playbook, a digital toolkit for learning and sharing resources about digital place-based engagement, showing best practice examples to help local authorities and planners to improve engagement with residents and communities. This show and tell will be for about 30 or 45 minutes and will be followed by an activity at the end. If you want to stay for that as well, that would be great. And we also have a Q&A, but feel free to ask questions as we go along.
So what have we been up to since our last show and tell? I think we've called this Sprint 3 because FutureGov have been involved for 3 sprints. But I think the Camden team are a bit ahead of us, so this is Sprint 6 or something for them. But since last show and tell, on the site notice side of things, we've created some initial wireframe designs, which we'll share, developed a plan for prototyping and the questions that we want to take into testing, and started recruitment for testing, which is due to kick off, if not later this week, then next week. And then mostly this sprint, we've been focused on the engagement playbook side of things. So mapping the content that we want to include in the playbook. We've done the survey. We've got 21 responses back from different authorities to input into what the playbook should include, define the initial taxonomy, and considered what someone that's contributing content to the playbook, how they can do that and what that looks like. So firstly, on the site notices, so this is a snapshot of our work in progress. We've been working on Miro and then also doing some designs, some initial designs in Figma around what that could look like on a mobile. I'll jump in. Do you want me to control and go into the Miro board, Ian, or do you want to take over and go into Miro? Teams plus Miro equals not that much computer power, but we'll get there.
So this was really an exercise I started out doing to try and put some structure to the ideas that we'd had, sort of the content ideas, which are actually further right on this board that I did with me and Alex sort of did together. So we came up with lots of ideas of how it might, there we are, of how the types of content that might be included on the digital planning notice, and then we kind of grouped them a little bit as well. And separated them into like types of content, but also little bits of functionality as well. So things like being able to sign up for alerts, being able to vote things up and down, that kind of sentiment feedback that we previously talked about in these show and tells. So I just kind of took all that and I started trying to structure it, and I kind of thought, well, what would happen if we just threw the whole lot in? how might that feel? And as I sort of built the structure out, it began to look more and more like a wireframe, so like a visual idea of what it could look like. I don't think this is what it will look like. This is a bit busy, and it's not. It looks a bit designed, but this is not. I'm not a designer, so this is really just to have a look at structure and where things might go. But there are like a few things that might be worth just picking out, just to show you some of the thinking. The bar across the top, or right across the top, where you can see the button in the top right that says share feedback. One of the problems with potential problems with digital site notices is that people might struggle to find how they, like, we want them to give the feedback. That's the whole point. It's like to try and find a mechanism that allows people to share feedback easier. But my concern was that once you'd scroll down or scrolled up or however you were using it, that it wouldn't be especially obvious that that was the call to action, because this is a page with potentially a lot of information in. So I've suggested here that this bar across the top, which has the address and a big share feedback button, that could potentially be like a sticky header. So that would stay on the screen and the rest of the content would flow underneath it as it goes. So that's one sort of type of idea that we're thinking about. You can also see underneath the kind of the key information there at the top right, we have things like search all applications, sign up for alerts, and share application. Again, I was kind of at this point just putting all of these ideas into ready to try and get some feedback. We have this planning stage across the middle and like a big bit of text that could be a more visual thing, but at the moment it's text. It says you've got 21 days left, so there's always this idea that this is something that needs doing with some urgency. And then as we get down, these are the kind of the impact areas. You can see I've only put the first two in. These just copy and paste job at the moment, but you can see how we might just with bullet points, and if we can find some standardized way of writing some plain English impact statements, we can try and explain exactly what this will mean for people in the area. Yeah, on the right is just like an area where we might just have more of the kind of nuts and bolts of the information, like a bit of a paragraph about the application, directions if people want to go and see it, and then I've got a how it works tab, which might be a bit more about how the planning process works. Again, these are not fixed here now, these are just thinking, right, how might we position these onto a page. And then slightly further down here we've got this idea of some kind of sort of sentiment feedback, so people can, if they don't want to spend ages filling in a form, if they could just give us like some idea of what they think, that's better than nothing. So I used the only icons I could find within Miro that would vaguely help. So you could just say, yeah, I don't like it. Yes, I do like it. Could be thumbs up, thumbs down, that type of thing. And then at the bottom, if we want people to encourage people to engage with the planning process in general, obviously the notice that they are reading, you would assume that they were interested in because they've got to it. But it might be that they develop a passion for planning notices and want to find out more and see what else is going on in their community. In their area, so we could do similar applications below, and that's kind of, I've got like my post-it notes are around the side are kind of explaining the stuff that I've just explained really, but there's a bit more information there if we were to share that at some point. But that's kind of the gist of it, and the thinking again in terms of the way that it kind of looks was me and Alex talked briefly about like a website like Rightmove, who have no doubt spent lots of time and money on researching the best way to present information about places. So that kind of the shape of the page was kind of influenced a little bit by that. But again, this is not a design, so don't worry too much about how things look and where they are at the moment.
Thanks, Ian. Maybe I know that was quite a quick run through, but is there anything that anyone would like to add in terms of comments or anything that you think is missing, like that we've blatantly forgotten?
Can I just add,
or anything that you like?
Can I just add in there that I think one of the other things we talked about as well was around things like the idea of the site notice being this doorway into consultation. For like many people, it's that point of engagement in the planning process. It's quite far down the line, and trying to bring people further up in the kind of plan making stages of the process, whether that's place-based like sites, site allocations, frameworks, or whether that's just local plan policy level, like very top level. The idea of having that kind of that similar applications banner that you've got at the bottom there, and using that as like as a way of pointing people towards other consultations, earlier stages in the application process, in the planning process as well. So not even just other planning applications, but pointing people towards saying there's we're also consulting on site allocations in this area, and they could click through to that, and then that takes them through to site allocations sort of consultation exercise. So I think the scope to be able to use it as a signpost and as a doorway to sort of better engagement earlier in the process is really important.
Anything anyone else would like to add before we move on?
Just generally, but I know it says 21 days for consultation, so a large scheme like that one at 330 Grayson Road, obviously the statutory consultation is 21 days, but people can comment right up until the application determined, and obviously a scheme of that scale usually takes many, many months. So you want to encourage people that they can still comment. So a lot of people commonly write to us and say, my consultation period is over, or can it be extended? So I don't know if there's a way of highlighting that on the digital site notice to encourage people to consult even if the statutory period's over for consultation.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
That is good to know. The 21 days to go was only very loosely based on the So Solid Cruise hit single 21 seconds to go when I wrote that as just some placeholder copy. So yeah, that kind of like insider knowledge, Jono, is going to be, yeah, that's the kind of thing we'll need help when we do the actual copy.
So what are we hoping to find out from testing some designs of the site notice? And I think before we take these into testing as well, we're going to do some more designed mock-ups based on that content. But we're trying to understand, do residents actually care about social and economic impact of developments, and how would they like this information to be presented? What story really resonates with them around how we display this information? So yeah, giving residents information about impacts will hopefully result in more engagement, but we want to test that. We're testing whether residents want to be able to influence developments, and also if they want to be able to provide the kind of feedback that is meaningful at that particular stage in the planning process. And then good to keep in mind, but not a focus for this particular stage, but for future stages, we want to think about how planning officers can do something useful with residents' input. And now we'll jump into the playbook. Harriet.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm going to talk through this section on the playbook. If we can go to the next slide, please, Britt. Yeah. So as we've mentioned, we had 21 responses to the survey. So thank you so much to everybody who's filled that in. It has been really, really useful in informing the first designs of the playbook. And just the big headlines of what we've learned is that the pandemic hasn't had a huge influence on impact on engagement, but it's meant that planners are doing slightly more engagement across the planning process. So where previously some councils were doing engagement just at this point in the process, they're now doing it in a few more points of the process. And the quality of the engagement has slightly improved. Obviously, this is all self-reported, so this is planners' own view of the quality of feedback. This is probably because, like, quite a few people who filled in the survey have rapidly adopted new tools to enable engagement in the pandemic. Mindset, by which we mean corporate mindset, so the kind of approach within councils, and lack of resources are barriers to good digital engagement. And also there was a real theme emerging around digital exclusion. People are very concerned about that, and that they don't want the shift towards digital methods of engagement to impact on on people who don't have access. We did have a conversation about this briefly in a workshop we did on Friday with quite a few planners, and I suppose the kind of key response to that is that firstly, digital engagement doesn't mean digital exclusion. There's lots of ways to use digital tools in ways that people without digital skills can still access. But also that there are two other playbooks currently looking at community engagement more broadly, and I suppose what we'll do is look at how we work alongside those playbooks so that people can use digital engagement to complement existing methods of engagement. So this is not intended to replace face-to-face engagement, but simply kind of improve the toolkits available to planners so that they can get engaged with more people in better ways. So we've had two workshops with a group of local authority planners, and we did a bit more thinking about who the playbook is for, and we've agreed to focus primarily on planning officers. So they are the target audience for this piece of work, but there are obviously lots of different types of planning officers, so we need to consider those needs in this design. Some secondary audiences might be communities and developers, but that's probably for a later development of the playbook. And in terms of what the playbook is for, this diagram kind of explains how users will use the playbook and what the purpose of using the playbook is intended to do, or like the impact for users. So users will need to be able to contribute to the playbook so that they can share good practice and contribute tools and resources, and that is so that other people can learn from the pool of resources. So in terms of learning, there might be three kind of broad areas. So that would be learning about what is good digital engagement, helping people to find the right tools and resources so that they can do digital engagement, and also creating the conditions for good digital engagement. So I'll explain that in just a moment, but that's mainly in response to the barriers identified in the survey. So there are lots of councils who are struggling with a kind of resistance to adopt modern approaches, or with just a lack of investment and resource available to do engagement properly or well. So this section about creating conditions is really about helping people to make that case for change internally, so that they can improve their engagement. And the purpose of all of this stuff, just referring to this big pink bubble on the right, is to help local authority planners improve digital engagement with residents and communities. So really just keeping an eye on that as the main goal of this playbook. And just at the bottom as well, you can see there's a dotted line just there around managing. So we will also need to be considering things like, where's the playbook hosted, who's responsible for making sure that the content's kept up to date, etc. But yeah, I've got a little note here saying still needs to be tested, because this is just a model that we're going into the testing process with, but aspects of this may change based on feedback and observations that we make when local authorities start to interact with the first designs. So in terms of this learning section, based on kind of thinking about what the playbook's here to do and the survey responses, there's kind of three tasks or three questions that local authority planners might be asking when they need to improve their digital engagement. So the first one is like, what is digital engagement and what do I want to achieve? And we had a good discussion in one of our playbook workshops about the purpose of tools. So, you know, somebody needs, if they want to improve their engagement, then they probably have a goal around how that, like what improvement looks like. So in some contexts, a planner might be looking to reach 1,000 people and get some like sort of a sense check on whether they're making the right decision. But in another context, they might be looking to engage deeply with a particular target group. So that might be with disabled residents, about the accessibility of a space. So yeah, depending on what the engagement goal is for a local authority planner, they might need to look at use different resources and tools. And then once they've kind of identified what that goal might be, then they'll be looking at what tools and resources can I use to help me do this, which is the second point around finding the right tools and resources. And then this final point was, as explained earlier, is around creating the conditions. So this is about overcoming barriers to digital engagement, which might be a lack of funding and resource, or a different approach higher up in the leadership of the council. So these kind of questions will help us think about how might we structure the playbook to help people find what they need. And we're doing that through the playbook taxonomy. So what the hell is taxonomy, you might be asking, this technical term that we've just thrown in here. Taxonomy is it's a way of classifying and organising information. So it's just concerned with the structure of content. So just thinking again about these three questions that planners might be wanting to answer. One way that we're going to test in the first iterations of the playbook design is using these labels: learn, implement, and advocate. These might not be the right words. They might not be what resonates most with users, but we're going to test that through the testing process. But yeah, just with the idea that the resources might either be helping somebody to learn what digital engagement is, they might be helping them to actually do digital engagement, or it might be helping them to advocate and make the case for change internally to get more funding to support better engagement. So we're going to take you off to a Miro board now, which is showing you the work that we did on Friday with a group of planners. Lots of you were there. Thank you for coming. It was a really good session. Ian had mocked up a kind of just an initial idea about what the different fields might be for resources. And so the yellow, broadly speaking, the yellow stickies are Ian's stickies from the first phase of design, and then all of the blue and turquoise stickies are from local authority planners. So this session was intended to test our first thinking around how we might, what information might be relevant to display or to be able to sort through different resources. So without, we won't go into this too much detail now, because Ian's going to do a demo at the end to show you what's come out of this. But yeah, just to kind of show that the design process is very much in collaboration with planners, and we'll be considering and testing a lot of these questions that were asked. So the other thing that people need to be able to do is contribute to the playbook. And when contributing as a local authority planner, like, you're probably thinking, well, what should I share? What have I got that's useful for other people? And what information should I provide to help people learn? So I've got this tool or this thing that I did, and it was great, but I'm not sure what information there is relevant for other people. So here we need to think about how we might encourage users to share, and how we might ask users for the right information so their contributions are valuable and good quality. So in general, I suppose this design process that we're going through, what we're trying to do is get a good taxonomy to help learners find what they need. We want to ask contributors for the right information so that we ensure that contributions are valuable, and that ultimately this will help local authority planners contribute easily and hopefully reduce the admin burden of managing content to ensure quality. I'm going to hand over to Ian now to show you a first design, which we'll be going to test next week.
Okay. So what we're looking at is what an kind of an alpha version of the playbook might look like. 1 second. He's in so much trouble. One of the things we're trying to do is try and transfer what we did the other day in the workshop into something that is easy to search and that can be used kind of scale as more and more things get put on there. So this is Airtable. So I don't know if any of you have used this before. It's kind of just like a spreadsheets, but with more functionality, slightly sort of fancy spreadsheets, but it's a really useful tool, and this is what we're looking at the moment. So as you can see, I've just put 4 items in there at the moment just for demo purposes, but those columns, those column titles across the top line up with what we just looked at in the Miro board. So this is coming from the workshop, and here you can see that as you go across, like they have different kind of field types. So for example, engagement type that is it's kind of a multi-select. So if a tool or a resource is added to the site, added to the playbook, then you can assign more than one of those tags to it or items to it. And that makes it easy to search, because you can then search by engagement type and get, right, we want things that are just involve, or they're involve, consult and inform, etc. That search there that Brit is doing, I think, so that is one way of searching in Airtable, but that really just works like a bit like doing Control or Command F in your browser. So it will just, as you saw there, it will just highlight the words that you search for, and then you have to just scroll down and find them. But Airtable, and this is a good reason for using it, it comes with apps. So if you have like a paid account, and it isn't very expensive, then you can have like a proper search functionality, which I've already set up, but because we're not paying for it yet, you can't see it on this front end, unfortunately. But that would give it a real, like a proper search where you could type in and it would say, right, here are your results, as if it was like a website. So that's really handy too. You can, I'm just looking now, you can, on Airtable, you can also have different views. So you can't change anything on the front end at the moment, but if I was able to show you the back end, you would see that I've created different views. So at the moment, this is just a full list. So this is the list in the order that they were put in. But what you can do is, for example, if you go to group at the top there, Brits, and then pick a field to group by, and then you could choose collection. So now you can see, I mean, we haven't got many in, but you can see now we've split it up on the top left there to, yep. So separates into the collections tool. So it just basically groups all that content together. Now, to save you having to do that every single time you want to look at it in this format, you can have what are called views, and they appear in like a left-hand tab that pops out from the left, which you can't see at the moment because we've not quite got it set up. But that would also allow you to, you can also do this, you can group by any of these fields. If you wanted to group content by engagement type or planning stage, then you can do that too, of course. So this is what we're looking at the moment. This is what we're looking at working with at the moment, is loads of ways of doing it. I apologise, my kids have taken, can you keep quiet for half an hour, to can you set up a band and start playing, which is a different thing. And so the other thing is how do you get stuff into this Airtable? Well, another good reason for using Airtable is that it comes with forms built in. It looks pretty plain at the moment, but we can actually put sort of help text around all of these titles and all of these fields. So underneath resource title, if you wanted to be put some like instructional text on what that type of thing that should be, you can put that there. And then as you go through, you can add, as Britt is doing now, you can add stuff to these fields, hit submit, and then it will automatically populate the playbook. So this is really up to you and how you feel like the playbook would be best managed. But you could kind of just go, yep, free for all. Let's everyone just throw stuff in. Or obviously you could have a much more kind of considered approach and say, right, well, we have a team, so we have a playbook team, and they're responsible for reviewing content as it comes in. But the point is, it's really easy. So this is a really easy way, especially for an alpha, of testing out that route for contributors to add things to the playbook. And kind of do a lot of the work for, well, I mean, Britt's done it in the time we've been sat here. You didn't write a summary, but apart from that, you can see that you can quite quickly add something to the playbook just using this form. And then the third thing to say, although it looks like a spreadsheet, because it kind of is a spreadsheet, fancy spreadsheet. The other thing with Airtable is that it has an embed feature, so you can take the Airtable as you see it there, and you can embed it into any website more or less. So what we could do, and you can then maybe iterate on this in the future, is place the playbook itself, which is this, the Airtable, and then you could build a web page around it where you can provide more information and maybe some guidance and explain what it is and all that kind of thing. Maybe some contact details, the usual kind of stuff. That could all sit around this Airtable, which would be your central repository.
So this will basically signpost you to where a resource is hosted or held elsewhere. So you can see that on the how to apply for excellent funding stream Moolah, that might take you to a page elsewhere, which is where you apply for the funding stream. So if people are submitting case studies or their own resources, we may be able to sort of provide templates that help people pull out the relevant and key information. But yeah, that's still something that I think it's in our next steps design for the playbook.
Yeah.
We're thinking about that.
So what's coming up? So for the site notice, we're finishing the first iteration of designs, and we're thinking about the design challenge of how can we communicate the impact of developments in a user-centered way, and also then testing those risk-based assumptions that we went through with users. And from a playbook side of things, we'll be testing this with planners to get your feedback, designing how a planner is able to contribute, testing that form, and then starting to fill it out and develop the content so that there's some useful things in there. So please reach out. This is how you get involved. You can email digitalplanning@Camden or follow on Twitter. And before we jump into our quick activity, we'll open it up to questions or comments.
Just one thing on that, Britt. Is it worth saying that we'll need people to test this playbook? So please get in touch if you'd like to volunteer for that.
Definitely. Anyone willing to be brave?
Hi, Brett. I have a question. So with the design of the site notice and also the digital playbook, how much are you or we taking into account the gov.uk design guidelines? So it's components and elements. Obviously, we're all quite used to the gov.uk. We use it a lot for the national planning guidance and when we update our passports or apply for our MHRC tax refunds or whatever. So how much is the design being led by that, or how much is it being led by the users, and is there a balance between the two?
Yeah, it's a good question, and unfortunately Alex, our product designer, isn't here, but I think the idea would be to follow the standards that gov.uk set out, around the font used and the design and the layout of the notice. But then we'll be informed by user testing around what do they find visually appealing, what do they find interesting and engaging. So I can imagine us kind of balancing the two. But generally, gov.uk standards are there for a reason, and they've been tested so quite rigorously around this is what works for users. So yeah, that'll be a starting point.
Yeah, can I add in as well? That just I suppose we and we had this discussion in one of the workshops around things like, obviously at this stage we're just trying to test in terms of the playbook, trying to test the structure and the taxonomy and how people will use it, and it's kind of like the functionality. And so like Airtable seems to be a really good solution to do that testing in and to try and understand it. So I suppose the other thing is to understand, and I know that it does come with, and we had this discussion around sort of like APIs and how you could scale it from there, and it's easily replicated kind of within the tables and stuff. So I suppose the issue really for us is, in terms of any next steps, if we were to take it further and we do sort of that initial testing and try and get the idea of the structure and the resource right, then the issue is, which you've really said around sort of governance, like who hosts it and who maintains it and moderation and so on. The issue then is, do we try and push it forward in a way that's sort of platform agnostic, or do we kind of push it onto do we decide to use an off the shelf product? So I suppose that's one of the questions, is sort of trying to make sure that we use Airtable as a tool at this stage to try and get the structure right and for testing and things, but we don't necessarily constrain ourselves in terms of the design, that we are led by the users. So I suppose that was it's probably more of an observation than anything else.
I had a bit of a response to Jono's point around whether we're going to be sort of wrapping it up like a gov.uk service or something sort of more user-centered. I guess those things aren't opposites. But yeah, it might be worth just kind of considering which tools seem to be really effective. So for instance, like Commonplace, obviously that is not, I don't think it's really anything like a government service, but it's something that a lot of councils are using, probably because it's quite engaging. So I guess, yeah, we should consider what's working at the moment and use that as inspiration for the design of the site notice. Well, that's one way of approaching it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because yeah, it is that, and you already kind of mentioned it as well. I didn't mention it in the question around. It's a trade-off to an extent, isn't it? Sort of being aware of it, and obviously, like I know Alex is sort of down at the moment. We've had a lot of members of the team going down with illness and childcare responsibilities and things over the last few weeks on both sides of it. So, but Alex, who's been looking at that, he's well aware of that. He used to work for GPS, so I think there's like understanding that as a good way of being able to kind of tap into stuff that's already undergone a lot of testing and has a sort of familiarity with it, sort of like government as a platform and stuff like that is really beneficial, but it still needs to be balanced and led by users as well. We want to make it user-centered, so we need to get that balance right. So although it's sort of really important for us to look at that, we still need to try and focus on the users, really, because what we're really trying to do with this is try and encourage people to get the information they need to try and get them to engage more. And it may be actually that, so like one of the things we're looking at in terms of measures are obviously is trying to understand what the sort of rates of response are to applications. So we've got sort of like baseline figures, which I think sits around like 45% or something like that in Camden, for example, for just like household and full applications. But then actually people might walk away from it and not engaged, but feel like they've actually been more engaged. They've just been more informed by it and things like that. And that's where things like we don't have that now from site notices, but we do have it from platforms like Commonplace, like you're saying. Like it gives you that additional benefit, and that's a big thing with the digital site notices. We'll be able to tell who engages with it, but then who doesn't comment. So because the vast majority of comments when we looked at the data, they're all objections. You do get some in support, but you get the odd application where there's a real like split in the community, and you tend to get like a balanced. You get like two sides, but generally the overwhelming kind of proportion of our comments and observations we get in on applications are in objection to them. And so being able to actually understand, like using the data from Commonplace and using a digital platform like a digital notice would hopefully give us this too, is understanding actually people have engaged with it, but they're not objecting to it. They've looked at it, they've spent some time, they've meaningfully engaged with that, and they've not submitted an objection, and that just gives you a little bit more of an insight, I think, as a planner trying to make some decisions on how to balance different issues.
Cool. Any more questions? Otherwise, we might stop the recording and move into the activity and have a bit more discussion.